Let's begin. But first, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to The Broken Truth. Damian Carter stood in front of the ornate mirror of his sprawling mansion, adjusting the crisp cuff of his designer suit. The wedding invitations had been sent weeks ago, every detail meticulously curated to showcase wealth, elegance, and power. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, gold-rimmed tables gleamed under soft lighting, and the scent of fresh roses filled the air. Yet, amidst the grandeur, Damian's mind was consumed by one thought: Emily. His ex-wife. The woman who had once been part of his life, now reduced to a figure of struggle and financial hardship. He smiled cruelly at the thought of her arriving at his wedding, imagining her discomfort as she tried to navigate a world that had long surpassed her. He had taken care to send her an invitation himself, framed as a gesture of civility but intended as a public humiliation. Damian pictured her stepping out of a cramped taxi, wearing clothes that didn't fit, her face pale with embarrassment as she tried to mingle with the elite crowd. He boasted to his friends about it, laughing as he described how Emily's arrival would be the entertainment of the night. "She'll probably trip over the carpet," he said with a smirk, "or at least make everyone uncomfortable with her situation." The room of high society guests echoed with laughter at his amusement, none realizing that their judgment only fueled the fire that was about to consume him. Meanwhile, in a modest apartment across town, Emily held the envelope in her hands. Her fingers trembled slightly as she traced the embossed gold letters bearing Damian's name and the location of the wedding. For a moment, doubt crept in. She could stay home, avoid the spectacle, and let him continue believing she was powerless. She could choose silence. But as she glanced at the small, soft faces of her triplets sleeping peacefully in the next room, determination surged within her. This was not the time for hesitation. Emily made her decision. She would attend, but not as the woman Damian expected. She would walk into that mansion with confidence, grace, and an unspoken power that would leave him speechless. She had spent months rebuilding her life, quietly cultivating connections, and now she had allies and resources that Damian could never imagine. Her hand lingered over the invitation as she smiled to herself, thinking of the surprise she carried with her, a combination of wealth, elegance, and 3 little reminders of her strength, her children. The limousine awaited her outside, sleek in black, the engine quietly purring as if aware of the impending confrontation. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with anticipation. Each step she would take toward that mansion would challenge Damian's arrogance and rewrite the story he thought he controlled. She imagined the looks of shock and disbelief, the quiet whispers spreading across the grand hall, and it fueled her resolve. Damian, oblivious to the storm he was about to face, continued his preparations upstairs, adjusting his tie and practicing his smile. He believed he held all the power, that his ex-wife's presence would serve only to amuse and entertain. But Emily's arrival would change everything. She was no longer the woman he thought he could humiliate. She was poised, prepared, and carrying a force he could not anticipate. He thought he would humiliate her, but she was about to arrive with power, wealth, and a shock he could never anticipate. After Damian had walked out of her life, leaving her heartbroken and financially unstable, Emily found herself staring at the reality of her new existence. The grand dreams they once shared had dissolved into unpaid bills, cramped apartment walls, and nights spent pacing the floor, wondering how she would make ends meet. The city around her seemed to mock her at every turn. Neighbors whispered about the failed marriage, colleagues offered sympathetic glances, and every corner of her modest apartment reminded her of what she had lost. Yet amidst the struggle, Emily discovered a well of strength she hadn't known existed. Raising her triplets alone was both her greatest challenge and her most profound source of purpose. 3 tiny lives depended on her entirely, each laugh, each tear, each midnight feeding reminded her of the stakes. She learned to stretch her limited income, juggling multiple jobs, working long hours at the cafe, taking freelance writing assignments, and even tutoring children in the neighborhood to provide for them. Exhaustion became a constant companion, but giving up was never an option. She refused to let Damian's arrogance dictate the future of her children. The gossip from Damian's social circle cut deep at first. She would hear passing comments at grocery stores, in the city streets, and even from casual acquaintances, whispers about her poverty, remarks about how quickly Damien had moved on, snide insinuations that she was now less than what she had once been. Each word stung, but slowly, Emily transformed the pain into motivation. Instead of letting shame immobilize her, she used it to sharpen her focus, to remind herself that she had something Damien could never take, her resilience and her children's well-being. Over time, Emily began to rebuild her life, one deliberate step at a time. She enrolled in online business courses, learned to manage finances with precision, and reached out to professional networks she had once ignored. Her intelligence and charm, once overshadowed by Damien's ego, started to attract attention in the right circles. Slowly, she forged a reputation as someone dependable, clever, and ambitious. Her life took a pivotal turn when she crossed paths with a billionaire mentor and partner, a man who saw her potential when the world had only seen her struggle. He guided her investments, helped her start small ventures that grew steadily, and ensured that her children would never lack the security she had once been denied. Unlike Damien, he treated her with respect, offering guidance without judgment, support without condescension. With his mentorship, Emily's confidence blossomed, and the foundation of her new life grew stronger every day. By the time she decided to attend Damien's wedding, Emily was no longer the woman who had once been humiliated. She had built a life she could be proud of, one defined not by Damien's cruelty, but by her own intelligence, patience, and determination. The triplets were thriving, her business ventures were flourishing, and her social standing, quietly accumulated, carefully curated, was ready to surprise the very man who had once thought he could belittle her. She was prepared not just to attend the wedding, but to make an entrance that would leave Damien and everyone else speechless, a dramatic statement of her complete transformation. The sleek black limousine glided silently up the long driveway of Damien Carter's mansion, its polished surface reflecting the glittering chandeliers and manicured gardens that lined the entrance. Guests had already begun to arrive, draped in designer gowns and tuxedos, sipping champagne and exchanging polite compliments. The soft hum of conversation carried through the crisp evening air, punctuated by the occasional laugh that echoed off the marble walls. And then, without warning, the limousine door opened. Emily stepped out, her figure framed by the golden lights of the mansion. She wore a flowing evening gown of deep emerald, tailored perfectly to her form, exuding confidence and elegance with every step. Her hair shimmered under the lights, and a subtle but intoxicating scent of perfume preceded her into the night air. Alongside her walked a handsome billionaire, tall, impeccably dressed, and carrying himself with quiet authority. His presence added an unspoken statement: Emily was no longer alone, and she had power in every sense Damien could never control. From behind, 3 small faces peeked out, their expressions curious yet composed. The triplets, dressed in matching miniature formal outfits, clutched their mother's hands tightly. Their innocence and charm were magnetic, immediately drawing the attention of the crowd. Guests murmured among themselves, whispering in awe as the children's coordinated grace and radiant smiles captured the room's attention. Cameras discreetly clicked, capturing moments that would soon become the talk of social media. Inside the mansion, Damien's attention snapped toward the commotion. His mouth went dry, and for the first time that evening, the arrogance in his eyes faltered. He had imagined Emily arriving in tattered clothes, small and embarrassed, trying to navigate the world he now thought superior. Instead, she exuded poise and power, radiating confidence that made him momentarily stagger. Her presence, magnified by the stature of the billionaire and the elegance of the triplets, created a ripple of shock that Damien could not ignore. As Emily walked up the grand staircase toward the ceremonial hall, whispers grew louder among the guests. She did not hurry, nor did she stumble. Each step was deliberate, commanding attention, leaving behind the faint scent of triumph and control. Eyes followed her every movement, marveling at her transformation. Every detail, from the graceful sway of her gown to the quiet smile on her lips, announced a subtle victory over the man who had once attempted to diminish her. Damien tried to compose himself, straightening his suit and forcing a smile, but the image before him was too powerful, too undeniable. Emily's transformation was complete. She was no longer vulnerable, no longer the woman he thought he could humiliate. The realization struck him with a slow, agonizing clarity. This was not the poor, struggling ex-wife he had intended to shame. This was a woman untouchable in every way, wealthy, confident, and surrounded by the symbols of the life he had failed to understand or control. The arrogance that had defined him all these years faltered under the weight of her presence. He froze, watching as she approached, the crowd parting almost unconsciously to make way for her. The elegance, the children, the silent assertion of power, they were more than he could reconcile. Damien's mind raced, disbelief and shock clashing with his wounded pride. This isn't the poor woman I expected to humiliate, it's someone untouchable, he thought, the truth hitting him harder than any insult or public mockery ever could. Emily moved through the grand hall with effortless grace, her gaze calm and composed as whispers of admiration and surprise followed her. Yet behind her serene exterior was a story of painstaking strategy, quiet resilience, and a life rebuilt from the ground up. The man at her side, the tall and commanding billionaire, had become more than a partner, he was her mentor, her ally, and the key to the foundation she had been quietly laying since Damien had abandoned her. He had recognized her intelligence, her determination, and her unwavering commitment to her children, and he had guided her every step of the way, offering counsel and investment opportunities that turned her small ventures into thriving enterprises. Through careful planning, Emily had leveraged these opportunities to secure a life that Damien could never imagine. She had purchased properties under discreet names, invested in businesses that promised returns far beyond what she had ever earned before, and slowly built a network of contacts who respected her acumen and vision. None of this was flaunted until tonight, but the subtle hints of her success were impossible to ignore. The limousine that had brought her to the mansion, the designer gown she wore with effortless poise, the billionaire's protective yet understated presence, all spoke volumes to anyone willing to notice. Even the triplets, innocent in appearance yet sharp in demeanor, contributed to the atmosphere of quiet dominance she projected. Their synchronized steps, impeccable attire, and bright, engaging smiles were a reflection of her meticulous planning and the love she had poured into their upbringing. They were living proof that she had not only survived her hardships but had created a world where her children could thrive, confident and secure, free from the shadow of Damien's arrogance. Each glance they drew from the wedding guests amplified the aura of sophistication and surprise surrounding Emily, and Damien could feel it like a weight pressing against his pride. As the ceremony progressed, Damien's attention could not help but return repeatedly to her. Every whispered compliment he overheard, every polite bow of acknowledgement from the elite guests, and every glance directed toward her children chipped away at his sense of control. He realized that she had anticipated this moment with meticulous care, every element of her appearance, every subtle display of affluence, had been orchestrated to convey a truth he could not ignore: Emily was untouchable, powerful, and unshakable. The billionaire by her side, though calm and understated, was a living symbol of the new life she had built, a life that thrived on intellect, careful planning, and unyielding determination. Damien's mind raced, realizing that every assumption he had made about Emily's weakness had been catastrophically wrong. She had transformed her vulnerability into strength, her struggle into strategy, and her absence of wealth into a silent, formidable power. By the time she reached the center of the room, Damien could no longer deny it. He had underestimated her resilience, her intelligence, and the quiet ferocity with which she protected everything she valued. Emily was no longer the woman he had tried to belittle, she was a force unto herself, backed by influence, resources, and a strategic mind that had anticipated every move he might make. Tonight, Damien learned a truth that would haunt him: she had not merely survived, she had thoroughly outmaneuvered him. The clinking of champagne glasses and soft murmurs of conversation filled the grand hall as Damien raised his glass to deliver his wedding toast. Every eye turned toward him, some with admiration, others with polite curiosity. He began with practiced charm, his voice carrying easily across the room, until his gaze landed on Emily. A smirk tugged at his lips, and he could not resist the temptation to twist his words into a subtle jab. "Well," he said, his tone syrupy yet sharp, "it's remarkable to see some familiar faces tonight. Some have changed, dramatically, I might add," he added, his eyes glinting with malice as they landed on Emily. The crowd waited politely, unaware of the venom beneath his smile. Damien imagined the gasps of recognition, the whispers of judgment he expected her to endure. He pictured her flustered, humiliated, caught in the spotlight of her former failures. Emily met his gaze calmly, her lips curving into a serene, confident smile. There was no tremor, no hint of fear, no trace of the insecurity he had anticipated. Instead, she raised her glass slightly, a subtle gesture that drew attention without confrontation. "Change," she said softly but clearly, her voice carrying over the hushed crowd, "isn't always a sign of weakness. Sometimes it's the quiet work behind the scenes, the resilience, the dedication, and the love for those who depend on you, that transforms a life." Her words, elegant and measured, contained no direct insult, yet the meaning was unmistakable. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd. Guests leaned toward one another, nodding subtly, impressed by the composure and intelligence she radiated. Some discreetly glanced at the billionaire standing beside her, while others admired the perfect harmony of her triplets, who giggled and clutched her hands with infectious delight. The children's presence was magnetic, capturing attention effortlessly as they moved among the guests with playful confidence, their charm impossible to ignore. Damien felt a sudden, sharp pang of panic, a crack in the carefully maintained armor of arrogance he had worn for so long. Each whisper, each approving glance directed toward Emily, chipped away at the sense of control he had assumed. He realized, with growing horror, that the very tools he had once used to belittle her, her past struggles, her social standing, her modesty, were now irrelevant. She had transformed them into a tableau of triumph, demonstrating not only personal success but also the thriving life she had built for her children. The room shifted around Damien. Where he had expected to see discomfort, he saw admiration; where he had anticipated embarrassment, he witnessed respect. The subtle recalibration of power in the room was undeniable, and he could not ignore it. The elite guests, who had once whispered about her failures, now exchanged looks of astonishment at her composure and poise. As Emily's smile met his for the briefest moment, Damien understood the full weight of the reversal. She had not arrived merely to witness or endure the ceremony, she had arrived to redefine the narrative, to assert control, and to reveal the reality of her success. The arrogance that had carried him for so long began to crack under the undeniable truth: Emily was no longer the woman he could dismiss or demean. Tonight, she had claimed the room, the crowd, and the moral high ground, leaving him powerless in ways he could never have anticipated. As the ceremony continued, Damien's pride festered like a growing storm inside him. Every glance directed at Emily, every whispered compliment from the guests, felt like a personal insult. He could no longer tolerate her quiet dominance in the room, nor the subtle admiration she inspired. Determined to reclaim some semblance of control, he excused himself from a group of curious onlookers and slipped away toward the balcony, where Emily had stepped out to adjust her gown and watch the sunset over the mansion's sprawling gardens. "Emily," he called, his voice firm, carrying a note of authority he hoped would intimidate her. She turned slowly, her expression calm, serene, as if she had anticipated this very confrontation. Damien stepped closer, lowering his voice, and began a calculated attack veiled as conversation. "You've always had a way of making life complicated," he said smoothly, though his hands tightened at his sides. "Do you remember all those times I had to cover for you, excuse your failures, and protect your reputation? Do you really think this display tonight, this show of wealth and children, changes anything?" Emily listened, her gaze steady, her posture unyielding. There was no flinch, no tremor, no hint of fear. She simply folded her hands gently, tilting her head slightly as if measuring every word he said. "Damien," she began softly, her voice a contrast to his venom, "I am not here to relive the past or seek your approval. The life I have now is not because of what you did or didn't do, it is because I chose to build something lasting, something meaningful for myself and my children. I do not need your validation." He bristled, attempting to regain dominance. "You think money and appearances erase the truth? That showing up with," he gestured vaguely toward the limousine parked below, the billionaire who accompanied her, and the triplets smiling innocently nearby, "all of this proves anything?" His voice cracked slightly with frustration, revealing cracks in the polished arrogance he usually wore like armor. Emily's lips curved into a subtle, knowing smile. "It is not appearances that matter," she said. "It is the life we create, the people we surround ourselves with, and the integrity we maintain. My partner, the businesses I have built, the stability I have provided for my children, all of these are proof that I am no longer vulnerable to the whims of anyone who underestimated me. I am not the woman you left behind. I am someone stronger, wiser, and untouchable." Damien's face paled slightly as her words sank in. Every jab he had intended to land had bounced harmlessly off her composed exterior. Every attempt to intimidate her fell flat. The realization was crushing. He had lost more than just financial control. He had lost dignity, moral authority, and the illusion that he could command her life. The arrogance that had carried him through society, through business, and through every conquest of his ego began to crumble under the weight of undeniable truth. For the first time, Damien understood the magnitude of his miscalculation. He had assumed Emily's poverty, her struggles, and her past vulnerability would remain tools for his amusement. Instead, she had turned every hardship into fuel, every challenge into strategy, and every slight into motivation. She was no longer the person he could manipulate, mock, or control. Emily took a step back, her gaze calm yet unwavering, and nodded politely. "I hope tonight teaches you something," she said softly. "Some things cannot be bought, commanded, or humiliated away. Respect, integrity, and love for those who depend on you, these are earned, not inherited. And Damien, you've lost the chance to influence any of it." He stood frozen, silent, watching as she walked back toward the ballroom, the billionaire at her side and the triplets following closely. Every step she took reinforced the truth. Damien's arrogance had crumbled, and Emily had claimed victory not with words, but with poise, power, and undeniable presence. The moment Emily re-entered the grand ballroom, the atmosphere shifted palpably. Guests who had been murmuring politely now whispered with fascination, their attention fully captured by her presence. The subtle yet unmistakable power she exuded was impossible to ignore. Eyes darted toward the billionaire standing beside her, tall, composed, and emanating quiet authority, and then to the triplets, perfectly poised in miniature formal attire, their small hands clasped in their mothers as they navigated the room with confidence and charm. The combination of elegance, intelligence, and family unity created a magnetic presence that drew admiration from every corner. Word traveled quickly among the elite crowd. Someone remarked discreetly to another guest, "She has triplets? And a partner like that? I had no idea." The revelation spread like wildfire, carried from table to table, whispered from group to group, until the once distracted attendees were now fully aware of the depth of Emily's success. Conversations shifted subtly, admiration and astonishment replacing the polite curiosity that had initially greeted her entrance. Emily's quiet triumph became the unspoken centerpiece of the evening. Damien tried to reclaim some semblance of control, raising his glass to continue the toast, attempting to inject humor into the situation. Yet, every word felt hollow, every smile forced. The crowd's attention was no longer on him, it had shifted irrevocably to Emily. He caught snippets of whispered compliments, how poised she was, how effortlessly confident, how her children radiated charm and intelligence. The stark contrast between the woman he had expected, awkward, flustered, humiliated, and the reality before him was undeniable. Photographers discreetly captured the scene, their cameras catching Emily's serene smile, the triplets' playful innocence, and the billionaire's understated presence. By the time Damien realized it, the images were already circulating among the wedding guests, further cementing her elevated social standing. Guests who had once doubted her capabilities now nodded in acknowledgement, offering polite bows or discreetly sharing their admiration. Emily's dignity and composure commanded respect, and even those who had once whispered about her failures now found themselves impressed and captivated. Damien's humiliation was not just social, it was visceral. Every attempt to assert authority, every carefully rehearsed joke or pointed remark, fell flat against the reality of Emily's success. She had orchestrated a public revelation that left him powerless, unable to counter or regain control. The crowd's collective acknowledgement of her achievements, her grace, and her strategic life choices rendered his presence secondary, almost irrelevant. As Emily moved through the ballroom, the subtle nods of recognition, the quiet exclamations of awe, and the captivated smiles of the elite guests created a crescendo of social triumph. Damien, standing at the center of what was supposed to be his celebration, felt the weight of his miscalculation crushing his pride. The woman he had intended to shame had not only survived but had flourished beyond his imagination. He watched helplessly as she spoke with ease, laughing softly with her children, the billionaire subtly supporting her, and realized, with a sinking certainty, that every moment of arrogance, every attempt at control, had been rendered meaningless. She had reclaimed the narrative entirely, leaving Damien humiliated in the eyes of the very society he had once thought he dominated. Her presence, her dignity, and her carefully orchestrated triumph had eclipsed the wedding itself, cementing her status as untouchable and leaving Damien to confront the full magnitude of his failure. As the night drew on, Damien Carter remained rooted in the center of his grand ballroom, surrounded by guests who now viewed him through a lens of subtle pity and astonishment. His carefully constructed image of success and control had crumbled entirely. Every glance that fell on Emily, every compliment whispered in admiration, and every smile directed at her children underscored the reality he could not escape. He had misjudged her, and in doing so, he had laid bare his own arrogance and vulnerability. Damien's social credibility, once untouchable among his elite peers, now teetered precariously on the edge, eroded by the very woman he had sought to humiliate. Emily, meanwhile, remained the embodiment of calm and confidence. She moved through the room with her head held high, her triplets following closely, their laughter soft but commanding attention, and the billionaire at her side, discreetly yet unmistakably signaling her power. Every step she took reinforced the message that she had not only survived her struggles but had flourished beyond anyone's expectations. She did not need to shout her triumph, her poise, elegance, and the quiet harmony of her family conveyed it perfectly. The wedding, intended as Damien's showcase of status and wealth, had become the stage for Emily's ultimate victory. Guests continued to murmur, exchanging impressed glances as they observed the seamless grace with which she navigated conversations, the attentive care she showed her children, and the subtle aura of authority she carried. She laughed softly at the appropriate moments, yet her eyes, calm, unwavering, and proud, spoke volumes. She had transformed what was meant to be her moment of humiliation into a declaration of independence, intelligence, and triumph. The triplets, radiant in their miniature formal attire, embodied the life Emily had fought to protect and cultivate. Their presence was a living testament to her resilience, her unwavering dedication, and the future she had ensured for them. Each smile, each playful glance, and each quiet word they exchanged with her reinforced the strength of the family she had created, a family grounded in love, stability, and dignity, a sharp contrast to the superficial arrogance Damien had relied upon for power. As the evening wound down, Emily signaled her departure. The limousine awaited, gleaming under the soft lights of the estate. She moved toward it with quiet authority, the triplets trailing, their small hands clasped securely in hers. The billionaire followed, a silent but unmistakable guardian of the life she had rebuilt. Damien, watching helplessly from the balcony, could do nothing but witness the culmination of her careful planning, resilience, and unwavering determination. Every move she made was a reminder of his failure to understand, respect, or value her strength. The limo doors closed, carrying Emily and her family away from the scene of her attempted humiliation. The soft purr of the engine fading into the night was the final punctuation of her victory, leaving Damien surrounded by whispers, awkward glances, and the crushing weight of his arrogance undone. She had arrived to be shamed, but instead, she had claimed control, commanded admiration, and left an indelible mark on everyone present. He invited her to shame her, but she arrived with power, wealth, and family, leaving him humiliated in ways he would never forget. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to The Broken Truth.